Welcome to this session. The first presentation is by Sharad Lele and under environmental governance and future municipal structure.
What I did want to say before I present a summary of the paper is that the big challenge for me was not so much visualizing that future situation as much as thinking about, as Ashish said in the morning, we are doing this visualization, at least for me it seemed that the reason to do it was not just to sort of paint some rosy picture of a possible future, but in some sense help us think through links between here and there. How do we get from here to there? And that was really the toughest part of the paper, in the sense, although Ashish had given us a mandate to be, very radical, imaginative, and think of that future without worrying too much about getting from here to there, I was really not able to separate those two. The thinking of a future without thinking about how do we get from here to there. I really struggled a lot, and I'm hoping that this workshop will help me maybe clarify some of those ideas or make those links better. I really struggled a lot. So what you will see here is a very rough cut, and it focuses significantly on, given where we are, where we could be perhaps. So there's, I think, my future is perhaps less imaginative and more cautious, and open to a lot of discussion. So I just wanted to table this because for me the biggest struggle has been how do we imagine a future without thinking about the process, and how do we at the same time not get completely bogged down in the present and the constraints of the present. So I'd love to hear more from others, both on this paper and in their own work, how they have thought this through. So the mandate given to us was environmental governance, but then when I looked at the list of chapters, there was a separate chapter on conservation, separate chapter on water, transportation, and so on. So, as with all other chapters, there are significant overlaps. Environment in particular is very cross-cutting. So we decided to limit the scope of this paper primarily to the third part, which is not conservation, not resource use, but really pollution regulation. And again, it's an artificial sort of cut-off just to keep things a little manageable. For example, mining is part of resource use, and obviously environmental regulation involves a lot of questions around regulating mining. But when I was thinking of resource use, I was thinking of forests and water, and conservation sort of overlaps with the forest side of it, and water there was a separate chapter. Himanshu is not coming at all, is coming later, or?
It's not today.
Maybe tomorrow. So we decided to limit ourselves. The main focus of the paper is sort of the pollution side of the story. How do we regulate pollution, given that it's going to be with us? All human activity pollutes at some level, and we are certainly in an industrial era. So the question of pollution is very, very significant and increasing in the Indian context. A clarification about the idea of environmental governance, and I do know that the term governance raises hackles in some quarters, and receives a lot of positive connotations in other quarters. It's a really divisive term for some reason that I've not completely fathomed. But for me, it's been a useful term because, on the one hand, it talks, it lays out the complexity of the process of regulation, which is standard setting, monitoring, enforcement, and the larger processes of awareness building and integrating, for example, pollution control or pollution elimination into the production process. But governance also highlights the presence of multiple actors. Conventionally, when we talked about environmental regulation, we talked about the polluters and the regulators. We thought of an agency like the Pollution Control Board, and it basically interacts with the polluters and makes them comply with the predefined standards in some sense. But we know that over the last 30 years, there's been a lot of discussion of the fact that this process is broader than just these two players. So you've got the pollutees, the people who actually get affected by pollution, either themselves or civil society groups that work on these questions of pollution are significant players in this process of governing pollution. And the judiciary has been a separate sort of actor in some sense, playing a very significant role, particularly in India, but elsewhere also. It has its own standing in this process of negotiating between polluters, regulators, and polluters. So, for me, the term governance, for us, the term governance captures this broader process rather than only the regulatory process of regulators enforcing standards on polluters. So in the first section, then we talk about the current context of environmental governance in the country, and we basically say that it's a really paradoxical situation, because on the one hand, you've got almost 200 laws that relating to environment broadly, and a subset of that relating specifically to pollution. We've got pollution control boards in all the states, and they've been there for at least 30 years. We've got forest departments, we've got the NPCAs, now more in context of conservation. We've got a whole bunch of agencies that deal with the environment. And the pollution control boards actually have on paper a significant amount of autonomy, in some sense more than the forest departments, to do their job. And then you've got a very activist judiciary that has been by and large seen as green, and I would perhaps put green in quotes, I'll come to that in a minute. And it's been very active, so it's been interpreting the constitution, the statutes in a variety of ways that are favorable to bringing environmental questions to the table. And now we have had the National Green Tribunal also playing a fairly active role in this context. So we've got these things running in the favor of environmental management. And at the same time, the outcome that we see is an increase in the number of polluted rivers, for example, from 120 to 275 in a decade. We've got air pollution. We are now in 13 of the top 20 global cities. Most polluted cities are in India. We've got a huge solid waste crisis that I think all of us are familiar with in urban India, expanding into rural India in some sense. So all of us are agreeing that the problem has become even more severe as the on-paper capacities and even in practice budgets and staffing and so on has also increased at the same time. So Ram Goa, for instance, in an article a couple of years ago, used in a typical flourish, he said we are an environmental basket case. And I don't know whether I want to go to that extent, but I think it certainly is a matter of huge concern. And in an era of rapid industrialization, promotion of industrialization, promotion of Make in India or 9% GDP growth, all these targets, we're going to see increasing pressures directly in the form of pollution and then indirectly in the form of taking away of resources from some communities and allocating them to others or replacing forests with mining and so on. So we definitely have a huge challenge, an increasing challenge on that front. So we could become a basket case if we're not already one. In the second section, we try to quickly look at the causes of the current predicament, and clearly, at a sort of a proximate level, the issues lie with the regulatory authorities. Now, specifically in the context of pollution, you can say the pollution control boards are not doing their job. You dig a little deeper, and I've been doing that in the context of water pollution in Bangalore, looking at the structure of the pollution control boards. And what you find is that there's a real problem in the way the pollution control boards are structured. And I'll come to that in a minute. But both in terms of their so-called autonomy is limited, their governing boards are stacked with bureaucrats who are sort of rotating in and out from different departments. So there's no real accountability to the people who are going to suffer pollution. They don't have professional staffing from the CEO downwards in many ways. So that's at one level the PCB structure. We have also the anticipatory regulation process, the environmental clearance process, which bypasses the PCBs by and large and goes straight to the ministries or the regional bodies of the Ministry of Environment. And we all know, and Kalpavriksh among many others have documented very well the flaws in this anticipatory regulation process, the environmental clearance process. The judicial side of the story is also a little bit complicated. So that's why I was putting green in quotes. First of all, the lowermost courts, which actually deal with the day-to-day pollution cases, are quite different from the high courts and the Supreme Courts in terms of their attitude towards pollution. The capacities of these judges often to get into the technical details. We have read judgments where the judges obviously don't know what they're talking about. It's one-sided in the sense that the greenness is limited to a particular definition of green and environment. So in the Sardar Sarovar case, they said finally the development has to trump the rights of displaced communities. But in the context of air pollution in Delhi, they were willing to then displace small-scale industries out of the cities.
Water as the justification of project because people in the other areas
should get access to water. So it's a one-sided understanding of it's a sort of, what shall I say, light green or a idea of greenness without the redness side of the story. I mean, to me, red and green are not really separable. And here, clearly, the judiciary is making a very simple separation. So, pollution issues affecting middle class, cities, living conditions, are important, but other issues are much more tilted towards the development side. This is a sort of almost a superfluous statement to make in this context, that the socio-political context is not favorable to environmental governance. Again, a fair amount of lip service in various contexts, but in practice, obviously, the whole focus is on 9% GDP growth, and environment will sort of take care of itself. And this is, I think, translated into a weakening public constituency. So I see both within the environmental movement a fragmentation. If you look at the last 30 years, I have said this in several other fora, that the one section of the environmental movement that has flourished in the last 30 years is probably conservation. It has attracted a lot of middle class attention and support from young students who want to go and work on or study leopards or tigers or elephants. But it has weakened in the other areas of pollution and engaging in resource issues, water, and so on. You find a real weakening of the environmental movement and people working on that. But I think there's a larger weakening, which is that the public constituency for environment is now limited to the middle class, which wants a clean city or a clean environment in their neighborhood. But it's the same middle class which is driving the whole, and I'm very much part of it, so I'm not trying to point fingers here, driving the whole economic growth paradigm, because we are benefiting from all those, the post-liberalization era. All of us here, are reaping all the benefits of that post-liberalization economic growth paradigm. And I think we really struggle with that conflict, that contradiction between demanding a clean environment in your neighborhood, but then all the resources impacts are out there. And therefore also the debate on solutions is limited to the growth folks who focus on markets, and the judiciary we still somehow believe in command and control, but obviously the judiciary cannot actually implement things at the micro level. So with this context, we sort of try to lay out a vision of future environmental governance, and I don't think we have a very solidly worked out or all-encompassing idea here, so I really welcome your thoughts on this. But we start with the idea of trying to unpack environmentalism a little bit more. Starting with that idea of light green, that we said that the judiciary is sort of a little bit light green. That we need to have a better understanding of environmentalism and the role of environmentalism or the place of environmentalism in a larger progressive social agenda. And I feel that there I would go beyond the framing that Ashish has used in the write-up, or in the 5 pillars, sort of ecological sustainability as one pillar, but actually environmentalism is, I think, broader than that. Because it permeates in many dimensions of the 5 pillars. It's not just about the ecological sustainability as in a future concern. For instance, I would say there is a focus on livelihoods. I mean, the nature is actually what provides us livelihoods. So environmentalism is also about meeting livelihood needs of today and enhancing people's living conditions. Environmentalism is also about the non-material quality of life. A lot of the conservation agenda is really not about sustaining livelihoods in the future. It is about a different quality of life. The presence of a tiger is not going to sustain any livelihoods either now or in the future. It is about giving importance to a certain species, to other organisms for themselves. And that sort of flagging that as a quality of life issue or a spiritual issue, I think is important for us to recognize that that's a semi-independent dimension of socially progressive agenda. And secondly, also the issue of intergenerational equity and justice. It's not useful to think of social justice as independent of environmental justice or environmental issues as such, because a lot of environmental issues are not about my future. It's about somebody else's present. And pollution, though, the case that we have taken, is particularly important in that context. There's a lot of upstream downstream relationships in the pollution context, where the polluter is not suffering the consequences of the pollution. It's somebody else who suffers the consequences. So there's nothing in the polluter's long-term interest to cut back on pollution. It is hurting somebody today, but it's not hurting the polluter. So I think the sustainability framing limits the idea of environmentalism to only one dimension, which is the intertemporal dimension. And I think we need to broaden that framing of environmentalism. So that's our first attempt to say that a future environmental governance would recognize that this environmental concerns are actually much broader than just intertemporal. In the pollution context, they are already recognized in that sense, but we need to perhaps re-emphasize that point. The second point that we have dwelt on then is what is the institutional framework for this kind of future environmental governance. And there we really struggled because, at least in my limited reading of the institutional literature, the political science literature, we sort of have one huge body of work, what I labeled as Ostromian work on sort of collective action, which has emerged in the context of forests, irrigation systems, and so on, which is based on collective action. And it's based on the idea of environment as a common pool resource. And for the reason that I mentioned earlier, which is that environmental pollution goes one way in many cases. So there is no incentive for collective action. Why would the polluter and the pollutee cooperate in order to abate pollution? You would not do that. Whereas in the forest context, a village might cooperate in order to better manage the forest than allowing it to become open access. So we struggled with this question of what would be an alternative to the Ostromian collective action framework. We flagged two ideas of jurisdictional parsimony and also overarching regulatory authority, saying that operationally you do need to decentralize. Currently the state pollution control boards are too centralized in the state capitals, and the district levels and town level authorities have very little operational powers. But at the same time, you need overarching regulation, which could be much more at a sort of watershed and airshed level. So we've sort of flagged that in the details. And the fundamental challenge that our regulatory authorities face, which is democratic accountability. So I just I'll skip over the detailed case study. So democratic accountability is a fundamental challenge because our regulatory authorities are all stacked with bureaucrats at the top. There is no representation of pollutees in that. We have big technical capabilities, so we've talked about how those technical capabilities can be improved and how the judicial system and the way it provides conflict resolution support can really work much better with the regulatory process to strengthen that. The final point was about prevention and cure, and I'm thankful to Ashish and Joy for pointing this out. That it's not just about post-facto curing, but also anticipatory sort of reduction of pollution, integration of that into the production cycle itself. I'm going to skip over this this part of. I mean, this is just the details of how we have spelled it out for the pollution control boards. And just come to the last section on this, which was about getting there. And the again, as I said, there was a big struggle for us to try to figure out, are there examples today of places or cases where people have figured out a way to move a little bit in this direction, in this sort of glorious future that we are thinking about. And I would just say there are a few sparks maybe here and there. And the example that we have given is the movement around lake cleanup in Bangalore. It started off as a very middle-class environmental movement around needing lakes for walking in the morning and jogging in the morning and bird watching. It has diversified. It has looked at questions of fishermen's livelihoods dependent on the lake, the hobbies that use the lake. Also looking at the lake not just as an aesthetic resource, but as a resource for water supplied to the city. And how do we transform it from just that aesthetic resource into an integrated kind of lake management? And there's been negotiation with the pollution control boards about letting treated water into the lake and then reusing that water and so on. It's still very nascent, it's fragmented and so on. But I think that's an example where people are very actively engaging with the regulatory authority, with the water utility, and with neighborhood groups to try to build this kind of the coalition around a better use of water and cleaning up of the lakes. Finally, I'll just flag in one sentence the challenge again when you're thinking about this, that the issue of the structure and agency dialectic, right? So, to what extent can we think about environmental governance changes without thinking about changes in consumption patterns of the individual? And to what extent can we think about consumption pattern changes of the individual without thinking about the structures that are promoting certain types of consumption, through the market economy? And that's absolutely fundamental because the whole question of avoiding pollution relates to avoiding excessive consumption. You would not have that much production if you didn't have that consumption. You wouldn't have the consumption if you didn't have perhaps the kind of advertising that you're seeing, which ties back to the capitalist, a particular form of capitalist economy that we have today. So this question of structure and agency, I think, was one of the biggest puzzles for us. And we just sort of tabled that. We don't have any answers to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sharad.
Asim Srivastava. A couple of comments. One on the intergenerational issue. This is a standard problem in economics, which they wish away with discount rates and so on. But I think one needs to frame it somewhat anthropologically, by which I mean there's an issue of reciprocity. And the way we understand reciprocity today in sort of contemporary capitalism is in terms of exchange. I do something for you, you do something for me. But think of it in relation to parents and children. Now, there's a famous saying of the Buddha that, one can never repay one's debt to one's parents, but one can always pass on to one's children and others what has been given to us. So for those who are not present with market voice in the marketplace, which is to say the unborn, which is to say other species, which is to say the poor, there has to be a way to think about this in a more imaginative way than economists normally do. So this is just one of the things which I think one needs to think about. The other comment I have is about the constant use of the term sustainability. And one has to do a sort of historical etymology of that concept and trace it to where it comes from, which is the Gro-Harlem-Brundtland report in 1987. And the way I understand it is that sustainability was an invention of the global elites, the policy elites, to accommodate emerging ecological realities without fundamentally changing anything about the way the system was working and generating consequences. And again, one needs to challenge that with another concept. And the word I have in mind is actually renewal. So when I say renewal, I'm thinking as much of the future as of the past. I mean, bringing the water back to the rivers, reforesting the desertified areas, etc. Those are two suggestions which one should, think about. The final point I want to make is about the decentralization of the operational authority that you mentioned. It's time that one starts thinking in terms of legislative power for the, PRIs. And much like it happens in some parts of Europe, if I'm not mistaken, in parts of Scandinavia and in Switzerland, where a local law is created which can actually veto what the Parliament or the Senate enacts, on so-called higher levels. So those 3 points.
I'm Rajeshwari. Sharad, I have a couple of questions about, one is, of course, this whole pollution thing. I mean, pollution looking at urban industrial pollution, questions of conservation, these are important. But I think what perhaps the paper should do is talk about pollution of all the natural resources, but also of us as our minds and the ways in which we think about nature and us. I mean, like, we don't see us as part of a natural system anymore. I mean, if we buy into this Anthropocene argument, it is important. I'm not denying the argument as important, but we should say, I mean, how will, for instance, in a future man or woman in India think about themselves as part of nature? And I think that's something that the paper can emphasize. And we can afford to do that today. That we're not as somebody who's working against nature, but as part of nature. How do you visualize that? And for that, one of the things I really liked about the paper was about upward accountability and the emphasis on centralization, which has to change. The problem with that is that anything that we talk about environment and environmentalism is so, the scientization of environment, for instance, any measure, any of these are all highly centralized. I mean, local knowledge systems, the kind of measures, or let's say somebody who takes a handful of soil and says, this is warm soil, or this is cold soil. And we don't have those measures and those kind of things that are coming into this. How do we bring these technical capacities into these decentralized structures? And if the paper would dwell on that, that'd be a big added advantage.
Just taking off from what Asim was also saying, when we normally in the current discourse talk about regulatory authorities, it's a very centralized kind of a policy system. And then we're also talking about decentralization. And today, for example, you have something like PESA, which is local authority, which has a lot of rights, and yet you have projects coming in totally bypassing PESA. So how are we going to talk about decentralization, local authority to legislate, which does remain just on paper, and yet when it comes to opposition, then there are larger policy agendas which take away this local authority. So that's something that one really needs to focus upon, how much of the power at the micro level to veto. Unless that comes, and that's a huge political agenda.
My name is Arpita. I basically had two questions. The first one being, in the second slide, you spoke about how we have a multiplicity of laws and regulatory bodies, and at the same time, we have violations. And so, as a lawyer, I'm often kind of looking at this issue of compliance. You have a legal standard, but the culture of compliance is quite weak. So how does the paper look at environmental governance structures that perhaps induce a culture of compliance? And also, environmental laws itself are so conflicting and so fragmented, where you have certain interests or rights, say at the speaking for decentralization, but you have certain laws that completely conflict with that. So how does this structure of environmental governance address that as well?
Paradoxical situation. That's actually what I found when I was working on the human rights paper, that we have all these laws, policies, independent institutions, and seemingly a overall democratic structure, and yet the situation on the ground is so weak, so terrible. And I think that we're probably going to find that in many different themes. And I was wondering if we can have a reflection on that point itself, because I know, having worked in some other countries, that where you can explain away these things because you don't have the democratic space or you don't have a free media, and yet here we have everything, and yet the situation is so poor. So I'm wondering if we can have a reflection on why that is and why that persists, and in fact it's getting worse, that paradox.
Bharat Patankar. I want to make 2 points. One, I appreciate this connection with livelihood, which is very important in relation with environmental viewpoint. One thing is that movement is weakening. I will give some examples that it is again regenerating properly. In Maharashtra, for example, the movement for cleaning Rangala Lake in Kolhapur city. At the same time, the movement which was not there for stopping the pollution of sugar factories into the rivers has gotten regenerated again. And there was a big movement recently which made the authority to stop the sugar factory, Vasantdada Patil's sugar factory nearby Sangli. So these are the examples which were not there, but now it is increasingly so. The same thing about Powai Lake, there is some in Mumbai, also is happening in Pune. Actually, some efforts were there for doing something against the pollution in the Bhima River. Not very, huh?
Pune for Bhima or
Mula, sorry. Second point I want to make is that there are some examples of people doing something positive, because this is opposing something and doing positive. One thing is that there was effort and there was a big mobilization related to the Sayali Tiger project, saying that we want people's jungle, people's forest. And now people are moving towards forcing the government to making eco-development committees more people and livelihood oriented, and more related to people as a part of the nature. And same thing is happening about the southern part of the same project in Chandoli project, the protected forest area. The people are holding a festival for finding out the traditional knowledge in relation to the forest and
ये जो how to get there वाले पे I have some doubts. This implied assumption that there is a democratic context in which environmental governance has to be evolved. I beg to differ. I think the political context has changed long back, and there is no democratic context anymore. It's corporate controlled democracy. Your chairperson has written a book on a small dimension, energy and the oil gas issues, how corporates control. And you have series of ministers having been dismissed who just wanted to stick to the governance rules, Manishankar Iyer, Jayapal Reddy, and how Ambani saw to it that they are defeated. So that assumption, one, has to be questioned. Second, among the governing elite of the planet, only about democracies, or let's restrict it, in third world countries, the governing elite in our country, regional parties, communists of all shades, including Maoists to Gandhians, they somehow are not able to break the present development model, even to the extent this book, future book, outlines the topics, they are not there in their cognitive map at all. So when there is a counter consensus of corporate democracy and there is a popular legitimacy, every time Nepal's Prime Minister goes, he never visits small micro hydro dam. He visits only Tehri, be it Prachand, be it Baburam Bhattarai, be it the present Prime Minister. So there is a global consensus on a destructive model. And if Modi spends so much money, then what happens in January last year when he came to power? Just last January, the way he changed the proportion of land which could be used to non-commercial used in special economic zones, how much it benefited those particular houses who financed his campaign. And just add to this the advertising industry, the corporates, how they control our elections, our popular legitimacy. So whatever be the state, just talk to any of the company advocate in the National Green Tribunal. Their role is not to argue on the basis of law, but to explore the corrupt system and do the fixing, and not to argue with the judges in the National Green Tribunal. So this is the political context which I don't smell that. Intellectually, conceptually, it is very difficult to mesh the two realities and talk about that. Maybe separate papers are needed, but some indication of this context has to be there.
I want to integrate what Asim said and what Vijayji has just said. That I think there is this great picture of seduction which is sort of introduced to us by the West. That we were able to clean the Thames, we were able to deal with acid rain, and so these things happen, but in due course of time, with enough deliberations and consensus, we can get through the problem and solve the problem. And I live in the West, and I can say that these are pollution-free cities with markedly enjoyable lifestyles. But as Asim said, that we can extend the debt to the next generation. And in a way, I see that once the West was able to scale up. It introduced us to the scaling up model, and they were the fathers and the mothers in a way, and who said, okay, we're passing it on to you, and now our power elites, for the lack of any other word, are now passing it on to those who can't really take that gift and solve the attributes of pollution, attributes of other problems which come with it. And so I wonder whether, the issue is that, this whole nature of scaling up, the growth model, that is what the basic issue is, that ultimately we won't be able to solve it unless we hit at that, we don't want to scale up, we don't want to grow in that irresponsible manner. And that seductive picture which we've been presented with by the West is just a seduction which we'll never be able to sort of, it's a chimera, it's a mirage which we are never going to attain, just because that growth model is not within our realm of possibilities.
विजय जयलारी, मैं थोड़ा अलग से बात कर दूँ। एक तो जो हमारा सरकार की विज्ञापन या मीडिया का जो रोल है, गांव को लेके शहर को लेके अलग अलग है। अभी कुछ दिन पहले एक विज्ञापन आता था, अरे आंखें खराब हो गई, 20 साल बाद उसकी अगर धुएं से आंखें खराब हो गई, चूल्हा जलता है तो धुएं से आंखें खराब हो गई। अब देखिए जो आदिवासी है वो चूल्हा नहीं जलाएगा, उसे मुफ्त की ईंधन चाहिए, लेगा ही लेगा, धुआं जलाएगा, और उसके इतने में जो जंगल भी पालेगा वो करेगा। लेकिन इसलिए कि आप ग्रामीण और शहर में अंतर किया जाता है। आखिर एक बड़ा विज्ञापन आता है, अरे लक्ष्मी भाभी की सफाई तो गाँव में प्रसिद्ध है, वो कूड़ा डाल रही, एक महिला कूड़ा डाल रही है, और सुखिया भैया शौच करते हैं तो वो जहाँ मन करा वहाँ शौच कर देते हैं, इससे प्रदूषण नहीं होता है। अब क्या बात है गांव में, आप इससे इंडस्ट्री को ये नहीं कहते कि ये पर प्रदूषण फैला रहा है, गांव वाले को कह रहे हैं आपकी वो शौच करता है, वो गांव में अगर कहीं जंगल में चला गया उसका शौच करता भी है तो शौच का कीड़े सब खा जाते हैं वर्षा में। गाँव वाला शहर में आके तो शौच नहीं करेगा, है ना। ये बड़ा नजरिया है हम लोगों का देखने का, गांव और शहर का और सरकार का विज्ञापन का। पीछे से हमारे प्रधानमंत्री जी कहते हैं 125 करोड़ देशवासी अगर संकल्प करें तो कोई दुनिया की कोई ताकत नहीं, कोई सफाई नहीं हो। लेकिन फोकस गाँव वाले को किया जाता है कि आप गंदगी कर रहे हैं, शहर को नहीं किया जाता। तो और दूसरे में गंगा की बात होती है, गंगा को बहुत बड़े प्रोजेक्ट कर रहे हैं, गंगा नमामि गंगे सारी चीजें। लेकिन आप गंगा को देखिए, गंगा का कहीं पेड़ से आगे कितने बांध बने हैं, गंगा का कहीं पता ही नहीं, पानी नहीं है गंगा में। अविरलता की बात करते हैं, पूरा इतना प्रदूषण टिहरी बांध के कारण हो रहा है, सारी खादें बह के आ रही हैं, जानवर बह के आ रहे हैं, अब फिर हम कहते हैं नमामि गंगे, हम गंगा को स्वच्छ कर रहे हैं। तो मैं कुछ समझ नहीं पाया, मैं जितना मेरा कहना।
In a way, the point is made. Actually, it boils down to questioning the model itself. I'll tell you just in supplement what is said. Actually, it's a political thing. In Nigeria, this Delta movement, the Kensaro Viva episode, there was a popular movement to stand up against the environment, etc., and local people. When it interfaced with the shell, they just killed it, and the Kensaro Viva also was hanged. I was around, okay. I worked in oil industry. If you actually try to eliminate the pollution, you cannot. Most of the projects would be unviable. That is the cost of maintaining, bringing down the environment to that level. So these are the kinds of things. Basically, it would boil down to challenging the development model and ultimately politics. So otherwise, wherever, like when Bharat gave some examples, etc., local communities actually tend to be around protecting the environment, their environment, but when it interfaces with the power that be, then it collapses. Okay, everywhere you will find that kind of thing. So probably that needs to be taken into account.
This is Vivek Shastri. Just to push Milun and Pallab's point a little further, I think, and the development model itself. Right now, the model is this: we have this pristine idea of nature, this external thing which provides us resources, and we take the resources, we make whatever we want from it, and whatever we don't want, we reject it. So can we then start questioning this flow of resources itself? Taking something from nature and rejecting something that's not degradable, and that's where this sort of idea of pollution comes in. Yes, regulation is important, and having effective regulation is important, but I mean, we all know we always find ways to do something despite that regulation. We are good at innovation. So at heart of this at the heart of the regulation is the recognition that pollution is a necessary evil, that we have to pollute in order to lead a good life. So are there then examples, as others were pointing out, in the Adivasi life, in the rural life, where people have used resources without that pollution? And are there models like that that can be replicated in other areas where we challenge the concept of pollution itself?
So, first of all, thanks a lot. I think some really good suggestions for us to incorporate in the chapter, especially the question of decentralization in a more political sense, devolution of power. And so, I think we struggled with the boundary conditions of the paper. Right? What do we take as a given in the context of building this future vision? So, विजय प्रताप जी से मैं ये कहूँगा कि मैं आपसे बिल्कुल सहमत हूँ कि अब के ज़माने में कॉर्पोरेट डेमोक्रेसी चल रही है, तो जेन्युइन डेमोक्रेसी तो है नहीं. अब जब फ्यूचर की बात करें, आशीष जी ने ये कहा कि 100 साल के बाद के फ्यूचर में आप ऐसा विजुअलाइज करिए कि जो भी आप चाहते हैं वो सब हो रहा है. तो उसका मतलब ये है कि we have to assume that it is a genuine democracy, and we are not focusing on the democratic part of the story. So we are taking that as a given, as a background to environmental governance. So that is a fundamental assumption we have made in writing the paper, and among many others, such as right? So that's my basic response, that we have made many assumptions about the boundary conditions of that future environmental governance, and then of course we struggle. Right. So to connect with the other article, that's a good suggestion. The other quick point I wanted to make was regarding this point that has come repeatedly, which is the questioning the growth model itself, and is pollution a necessary evil? And I would like to push back on that a little bit. I'm saying that even so, when one person goes and does open defecation, that is still pollution. It is just that it does not matter so much. It does not translate into huge health impacts. But when you have a population of 50, 60 lakhs of Bangalore, if you say they will do open defecation, then you would have a serious health impact of open defecation. It's not. So there's no point in talking about. To me, I'm really going to push back on this point. I'm saying that whatever future we visualize, it's not going to be an Adivasi future. I'm very sure about that. And I think there is even the Adivasi future, past was a polluting past. It had its own. It had limited impact because of a small footprint, and the scale was much smaller. So we are not going to be living in that future. We will not go from a 1.25 billion population to a 0.25 billion population. Whatever future we visualize, I don't think that's going to be happening. So to keep that future visualization a little bit realistic, I think we want to make some boundary assumptions again. And all human existence has pollution consequences. Yes, it is true that when we move from a biomass-based economy to a non-biomass-based economy, which is a petroleum-based and therefore a mineral-based economy, the nature of pollution changes dramatically. From biodegradable pollutants, we create non-biodegradable pollutants, and that's a big jump. But that is also the jump that has given us that big jump in living conditions. And again, I'm going to push back and say that we cannot talk about a future where we go back to a biomass-based economy. If Selco is doing solar-based, for example, economy, that solar PV is based upon a huge polluting silicon wafer production industry. And we cannot get around that, in any easy manner, saying somehow miraculously we will have fusion energy which is clean and generate silicon wafers which are clean, and everything will be nice and unclean. I think the use of non-biomass-based resources comes with the consequence of a much larger or a different pollution footprint, and we just need to deal with that. Having said that, one thing that where we made a boundary assumption if we want to change is that we assumed that climate change was not in the purview of this chapter. I mean, in the sense, climate governance was not part of our mandate of environment governance. I think that may have been a mistake in our setting up the chapter, because the more I think about it, the only reason or the only way in which we will be able to contain or limit the consequences of unbridled, non-biomass based economic growth and development is by factoring in the climate change implications. Because I would actually I would like to know more from you, outside the room, but in terms of the local environmental impacts of petroleum extraction. But I was just in Canada for a month, and we had a presentation by tar sands, environmental analysis of tar sand, oil extraction from tar sands. And you do the whole analysis, the local environmental impact is quite manageable. And from $30 a barrel, it might raise the price to $40 a barrel or $50 a barrel. It's not going to raise it to $500 a barrel. If you just factor in the local environmental impact, the only reason you would raise it to $500 a barrel is you put a carbon tax for the consequences of using the petroleum, not for the consequences of extracting the petroleum. And I feel therefore that the only way we can really think of an economy which moves away from the conventional paradigm is when we factor in the climate change implications of using the carbon footprint as another pollution measure and really regulating that, which of course the Paris Accord has hardly given us any significant movement in that direction, but that's the way to think about it. Integrate the climate change implications. One small final comment or response to Arpita's question. The question of compliance is absolutely central, and that's why we have spent a little bit of time in the paper talking about the fact that there has to be a wider buy-in into this idea. And again, I'm going to push back a little bit. Bharati, I'm very happy that you give me the examples of environmental movements. Again, the question of from here to there. I think I'm still very skeptical about the amount of buy-in that we have at the local level into environmental compliance in the production. Everybody is just saying, "Arey, kuch nahi hota," and doing chrome plating in their backyard, doing textile dyeing in their backyard, dumping the pollutants into bore wells, happily saying ki kuch nahi hota, or just trying to fly under the radar. I mean, we see this across the board. So I'm really worried about that, but I'm saying that therefore a future environmental governance has to build upon a huge, broader cultural change. But in the cultural of compliance context, or the enforcement context, I think our focus has been in the paper on the question of transparency. That what we have said is that what we see from our research on the pollution control boards is that the biggest problem with the way pollution control boards enforce regulation and soften the laws or bypass the laws and bribery is a massive portion of what PCBs do is because of lack of transparency and accountability. So we sort of build on that a little bit.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you
very much.